My name is Nora. I am 33 years old, and I just listened to the steady, agonizing flatline of my husband's heart monitor. Thomas was gone. After months of battling a rapid decline, the machine signaled the end of our vows. But the tears had not even dried on my cheeks when the true nightmare began. Walking out of the intensive care unit numb and shattered, I froze behind the nurses' station. Two nurses were whispering frantically, unaware I was standing in the shadows. Did you see his mother force the pen into his hand while the wife was getting coffee? One muttered, her voice trembling. The other shook her head and replied that they just signed away the house while he was barely conscious. I stopped breathing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered that the people who were supposed to be your family were actually your greatest enemies. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled this ultimate betrayal. The sterile smell of the hospital corridor suddenly made me nauseous. The profound grief that had been threatening to crush my chest instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I am a corporate forensic auditor. My entire career is built on finding hidden money, exposing fraud, and tearing down liars. I wiped my face, straightened my posture, and walked toward the family waiting room. I expected to find a mother weeping for her eldest son. I expected to see a brother broken by profound loss. Instead, as I turned the corner, the scene before me made my blood run cold. Patricia, my mother-in-law, was not crying. Derek, my brother-in-law, and his wife Jada were not consoling her. The three of them were huddled around a glowing smartphone screen, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby. Derek chuckled at something on the screen while Jada, an African-American woman who was always dressed to the nines in her designer realtor suits, tapped the glass excitedly. Thomas just took his last breath, I said. My voice was eerily calm, cutting through the waiting room like a blade. The three of them snapped their heads up. For a split second, Patricia looked like a deer caught in headlights. But the guilt vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same arrogant sneer she had worn since the day Thomas introduced me to her. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her expensive silk blouse. She did not ask how her son passed. She did not ask if he was in pain. Well, Patricia sighed, putting on a terrible performance of a heavy heart. It is the will of God. We must be practical now. Thomas would want us to handle his financial affairs swiftly. Practical, I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Is that what you call forcing a pen into a dying man's hand while his wife is grabbing a cup of coffee? Derek took a step forward, his chest puffed out in that typical golden child posture he always carried. Watch your mouth, Nora. Our mother is grieving. You have no idea what you are talking about. You were always too emotional. Thomas always said you could not handle the big decisions. That was when Jada stepped in. Jada had always hated me. As a luxury real estate agent, she prided herself on being the glamorous, successful woman of the family while constantly belittling my corporate auditing career as boring math. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust, then reached into her oversized designer tote bag. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and practically shoved it into my chest. We do not need to explain anything to you, Jada sneered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the thick paper. Thomas made his final wishes crystal clear. He knew you were not financially capable of managing his assets. He signed a full power of attorney over to Patricia. The house, the bank accounts, everything. I slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the crisp white document. The ink was fresh. At the bottom of the page, Thomas had allegedly signed his name. But the signature was a jagged, desperate scrawl, nothing like his usual neat script. It was the handwriting of a man who was heavily medicated and completely unaware of his surroundings. You need to go home, pack your bags, and vacate the property by tomorrow morning. Jada continued, crossing her arms over her chest. The house is being transferred to a limited liability company that Derek and I manage. Do not make this harder than it has to be, Nora. Just take your cheap clothes and leave quietly. I stared at the document. A normal widow would have collapsed in hysterics. A normal person would have begged and pleaded with them to be reasonable. But my eyes bypassed the messy signature and landed on something else entirely. Down at the very bottom right corner of the legal document, stamped proudly in dark blue ink, was the official state notary seal. It certified that the signature had been witnessed and legally verified by a registered professional. I read the name on the notary stamp. It said, Jada Washington. A slow, dark smile crept onto my face. I looked up from the paper and met Jada's arrogant glare. My grief was entirely gone, replaced by the thrilling calculation of an auditor who had just found the smoking gun. They thought they were stealing my home, but they had no idea they had just handed me the keys to their complete destruction. I did not drop to my knees. I did not scream or beg for my husband's memory. I simply stood there, under the harsh hospital lights, tracing my thumb over the raised seal of Jada's official state notary stamp. The silence in the waiting room stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. Derek shifted his weight uncomfortably. He was used to women cowering when he raised his voice, a trait he inherited directly from Patricia. But I was not cowering. I was calculating. "What are you smiling at?" Jada snapped. Her perfectly lined lips twisted into a cruel sneer. She adjusted the strap of her ridiculously expensive handbag, leaning forward as if trying to physically intimidate me. "Are you having a psychotic break? I told you to pack your bags. The house belongs to the LLC now. We are locking the doors by midnight." I folded the forged document perfectly in half, creasing the edge with my thumbnail. "You know, Jada," I said softly, my voice devoid of any emotion, "I always wondered why Thomas insisted on managing the mortgage payments himself. He always told me it was to protect my credit score. But looking at this incredibly sloppy piece of paper, I am starting to realize he was just buying time." Patricia scoffed loudly, stepping up beside her daughter-in-law. "Do not try to act smart, Nora. You were never smart. You were just a charity case Thomas took pity on. He always told us how exhausted he was taking care of you. He provided the roof over your head while you played office worker." Jada laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed down the tragic hallway of the intensive care unit. "Let us be real, Nora. You crawled your way out of some pathetic low-income neighborhood drowning in $50,000 of student loan debt. You had absolutely nothing to your name. Thomas came from money. We are a family of generational wealth. We paid for his college in cash. We bought him his first car. We gave him the down payment for that beautiful house. You really thought we would let some street rat auditor walk away with our family assets just because you wore a cheap ring on your finger? Generational wealth." I almost laughed out loud at the delusion. Patricia's late husband had left a modest life insurance policy that Patricia had blown through in 5 years, funding Derek's failed tech startups and buying Jada's silence whenever Derek cheated on her. Thomas was babied his entire life, handed every opportunity on a silver platter, yet he could barely keep a job for more than 2 years without complaining about the workload. I, on the other hand, worked double shifts as a waitress, while taking night classes just to afford my accounting degree. Every penny I had was earned through sweat and sleepless nights. "Take your $50,000 debt and get out of our lives," Jada commanded, clapping her hands together as if dismissing the help. "The LLC takes full possession of the property tonight. Do not make me call the sheriff to have you forcefully evicted." I slipped the forged power of attorney into my purse and clicked the clasp shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed perfectly in the quiet room. I looked directly into Jada's eyes. "You are a licensed real estate agent in this state, correct?" I asked. Jada rolled her eyes. "A top-producing agent," she corrected smugly. "Which is why I know exactly how to execute a property transfer without waiting for a messy probate court to get involved. I know the law better than anyone." "Do you?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Because if you knew the law, Jada, you would know that under the revised statutes of our state, it is explicitly illegal for a notary public to notarize a document for an immediate family member. It is considered a direct conflict of interest, especially when that family member is transferring $1 million asset into a limited liability company that you yourself co-own with your husband. The smug smile on Jada's face froze. The color drained from her cheeks so fast she looked physically ill. Derek frowned, looking between his wife and me. "What is she talking about, Jada?" he demanded. I did not let her answer. I took a step closer to the terrified realtor. "It is not just a minor infraction, Jada. Falsifying a notary seal for personal financial gain is considered felony fraud. You did not just forge my dying husband's signature. You used your official state license to commit grand larceny. When the state board finds out, you will not just lose your precious real estate license, you will face up to 10 years in federal prison." Jada opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hands began to tremble. She looked at Patricia in sheer panic. But Patricia was not looking at Jada. Patricia was looking at me. Her face contorted in absolute rage. Before I could even register her movement, Patricia lunged forward. Her hand cracked across my cheek with a sickening smack. The sting of Patricia striking my face barely registered. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch my cheek. I just looked at her, memorizing the exact contour of her twisted, hateful expression. Then, without a single word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the hospital. Let them have their moment of triumph in that miserable hallway. I had real work to do. The drive back to my neighborhood took 20 minutes. It was a beautiful tree-lined suburb where the houses easily pushed the $900,000 mark. Thomas always loved bragging about our address to his friends, conveniently leaving out the part where my salary paid the mortgage. As I turned my car onto our street, I immediately noticed a chaotic pile of black plastic garbage bags strewn across the perfectly manicured front lawn. A pair of my expensive leather work pumps had spilled out onto the grass, abandoned like actual trash. I parked in the driveway and stepped out of the car. Standing on the front porch holding a cordless power drill was Derek. He had completely removed the brass deadbolt from the front door and was in the process of installing a cheap, shiny new lock. He stopped drilling when he saw me, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Jada called me from the hospital," Derek shouted down from the porch. "She said you got a little violent with Mom. I am just securing the LLC property. Grab your trash bags and get off my lawn before I call the cops for trespassing." "Your lawn?" I asked, walking slowly up the driveway. I kept my voice entirely level. "Derek, you cannot even afford the rent on your own apartment without Patricia slipping you cash every month. You really think you own this property now?" Derek pointed the drill at me like it was a weapon. "The power of attorney gives Mom full control and she transferred it to my company. You have no legal right to be standing here. I am giving you exactly 1 minute to get back in your car and drive away, or I am calling 911. I crossed my arms and stood my ground right in the middle of the walkway. "Call them," I said. Derek blinked, clearly confused by my lack of panic. "What did you say?" "I said call the police, Derek. In fact, tell them to send 2 squad cars. I want an official report filed." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly, and dialed emergency services. He played his part perfectly. He told the dispatcher that his brother had just died an hour ago, and his deranged sister-in-law was now harassing him and trying to break into his mother's property. It was an Oscar-worthy performance of a grieving brother just trying to protect his family. Within 10 minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing silently in the quiet neighborhood. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Derek immediately ran down the steps to meet them, putting on a distressed, exhausted face. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Derek pleaded. "My brother literally just passed away at the hospital. This woman is his widow. We have all the legal paperwork transferring this property to my mother to protect his assets, but she refuses to leave. She is trespassing." The taller officer gave me a sympathetic but firm look. "Mom, I am very sorry for your loss. Truly I am. But if the family has the power of attorney and the deed transfer, this is considered a civil matter, and you cannot stay here tonight. I'm going to have to ask you to collect your belongings from the lawn and vacate the premises immediately. We do not want to make an arrest on the day your husband died." I nodded politely at the officer, making sure to maintain eye contact. "I understand why you would think that, officer. However, this man is lying to you, and he is currently vandalizing my front door." Derek scoffed loudly, throwing his hands in the air. "She is delusional. She has always been crazy. Look, I can show you the paperwork my wife sent me." He fumbled with his phone, desperately trying to pull up the scanned copy of the forged power of attorney. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my own phone, and navigated directly to the county tax assessor's public property database. As a forensic auditor, accessing municipal records was practically muscle memory. I typed in my home address, tapped the search button, and held the glowing screen out to the officer. "You do not need to look at his fabricated papers, officer," I explained smoothly. "The county tax records are public and updated in real time. Please read the legal owner of this property out loud for Derek to hear." The officer took my phone and squinted at the bright screen. His expression shifted from sympathetic to stern. He cleared his throat and read the official county deed registration aloud. "The legal owner is listed as the Nora Hayes Revocable Living Trust." "That is exactly right," I said, finally turning my gaze to Derek's rapidly paling face. "Thomas never owned this house. His name was never on the deed, not even for a single day. I bought this property using a single-member trust a year before we were even married, using my own money. The house belongs entirely to my trust, and I am the sole trustee. So unless Derek can show you a document where I personally signed over my trust, his mother has absolutely no legal authority here. He is currently trespassing, breaking and entering, and destroying private property. Now, officer, I would like to press charges." The taller officer did not hesitate. He handed my phone back to me and turned to Derek with a look of absolute disgust. "Sir, drop the power drill right now. Step away from the door and place your hands where I can see them." Derek stammered, his arrogant facade crumbling instantly. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. She is lying. My mother has the power of attorney." The officer unclipped his handcuffs. "The county database does not lie, sir. You are officially trespassing on private property, and the homeowner wishes to press charges for property damage. Now walk to your vehicle before I arrest you for breaking and entering." Jada let out a high-pitched gasp. She scrambled down the driveway, completely abandoning her expensive leather heels in the grass, rushing toward her luxury SUV. Derek threw the drill onto the porch and backed away, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and utter humiliation. As the police escorted them off my property, Derek shot me a look of pure venom. I just smiled and waved. Let them run back to Patricia. They had much bigger legal problems coming their way. Once the police cruisers disappeared down the street, I turned the knob and pushed open my front door. The moment I stepped inside, the adrenaline wore off, leaving a cold pit in my stomach. The house was completely trashed. It looked like a tornado had ripped through the main floor. The custom sofa cushions were thrown across the living room. My kitchen cabinets were wide-open, dishes shattered on the hardwood floor. Drawers were yanked from the console tables, their contents dumped unceremoniously. They were not just trying to change the locks, they were frantically searching for something. I stepped over the broken glass and made my way straight down the hallway to Thomas's home office. The door was wide open. Inside, the heavy Persian rug had been shoved into the corner. Several oak floorboards had been violently pried up with a crowbar, leaving jagged splinters of wood exposed. Derek had completely destroyed the flooring, trying to find something hidden underneath. I stood in the doorway and let out a dry, humorless laugh. Derek and Patricia always thought they knew Thomas better than anyone, but they were fools. Thomas hated getting his hands dirty. He would never hide something beneath the floorboards where he had to pry nails loose just to access it. I walked over to the massive, solid oak filing cabinet in the corner of the room. It was the one piece of furniture Derek had ignored, probably assuming it only contained boring tax returns. I pulled open the bottom drawer, reached all the way to the back, and pressed firmly against the false wooden panel. It popped open with a soft click, revealing a sleek steel biometric safe bolted directly into the frame of the cabinet. I knelt down and stared at the digital keypad. Thomas was notoriously terrible with passwords. I typed in his birth date. The keypad flashed red. I typed in Patricia's birth date, knowing his mother was his ultimate priority. Another red flash. I paused, letting my fingers hover over the cold metal keys. A bitter thought crossed my mind. What is the one date a man like Thomas would use simply because it was the one date I forced him to memorize every single year? I typed in the date of our wedding anniversary. The safe beeped twice, and the heavy steel door swung open. The sheer irony of it made me sick. Inside the dark compartment sat two things: a thick stack of paper documents bound by heavy rubber bands, and a cheap plastic prepaid burner phone. I pulled the documents out first, my mind instantly shifting into forensic auditor mode. They were bank statements. But these were not from our joint checking account or any local branch. The letterhead belonged to a highly secretive offshore financial institution based in Switzerland. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers with practiced speed. My breath caught in my throat. There were dozens of massive wire transfers dating back over 2 years. $20,000 here, $50,000 there. The total balance was staggering, but what horrified me more was the source of the funds. The routing numbers matched the corporate accounts of the company Thomas worked for. He had not just been hiding money. He had been actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his employer. My hands started to shake not from grief, but from the sheer magnitude of the financial crime my late husband had committed. Before I could process the devastating reality that my house and my career could be implicated in a federal investigation, a sharp buzzing sound broke the silence. The cheap burner phone sitting inside the safe had just lit up. I reached inside and picked up the small plastic device. The screen was cracked, but the notification was glowing brightly in the dark office. It was a new text message from an unsaved number. I swiped the screen to unlock it, and the words practically burned themselves into my retinas. The text message read, "Is the wife gone yet? The baby needs his trust fund set up. Call me the second she is out of the house." I stared at the glowing letters until they blurred. A mistress, a baby, an offshore account built on stolen corporate funds. Thomas had not just betrayed our marriage. He had constructed an entire alternate reality funded by felony embezzlement, and his family was trying to steal my house to get to it. The game had just changed. I set the phone down on the desk, feeling a terrifying sense of calm wash over me. Patricia, Derek, and Jada thought they were fighting a grieving widow. They were about to find out what happens when you wage war against an auditor who holds all the receipts. The morning of the funeral was overcast, matching the heavy, suffocating atmosphere inside the church. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress, carrying nothing but a small clutch and my tablet. As the widow, I should have been sitting in the front pew receiving condolences, but Patricia had other plans. When I walked down the center aisle, Derek stepped directly into my path, crossing his arms like a bouncer at a cheap nightclub. Patricia stood behind him, adjusting her black lace veil. She pointed a manicured finger toward the very last row near the wooden doors. "That is where you sit today, Nora," she commanded in a harsh whisper. "The front rows are reserved for actual family, not temporary mistakes." I did not argue. I simply nodded, turned around, and took my seat in the back. I wanted a full view of the room anyway. The church slowly filled with Thomas's colleagues from the corporate office, his extended relatives, and his childhood friends. The organ music played softly in the background, a somber tune that felt entirely fake to me now. Just as the service was about to begin, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open. A young woman stepped inside. She could not have been older than 25. She was holding a chubby 1-year-old boy on her hip. The woman looked nervous, glancing around the room until her eyes locked with Patricia's. I recognized her instantly. She was the woman from the photos on the burner phone I found in the safe. This was Amber. The mistress. Patricia did not look shocked or scandalized by the late arrival. Instead, her face lit up with genuine joy. She practically shoved Derek aside and rushed down the aisle to embrace Amber right in front of the entire congregation. The gasps and murmurs from Thomas's coworkers echoed through the high vaulted ceiling, but Patricia did not care. She kissed the toddler's cheek, took Amber by the hand, and proudly escorted them to the front pew. She seated Amber exactly where I was supposed to be sitting. Jada leaned over and patted Amber's shoulder, offering a sickeningly sweet smile. They all knew. The realization hit me like a freight train, but I kept my breathing steady. They had all known about this alternate life Thomas was building, and they had actively protected it while I paid their bills. The priest said his opening prayers, keeping his eyes awkwardly averted from the drama in the front row. Then Patricia approached the podium to deliver the eulogy. She gripped the edges of the wooden stand, looking out at the crowd with tear-filled eyes. She was ready to put on the performance of a lifetime. Thomas was an incredible man. She began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. He was a provider. He was a protector. But most importantly, Thomas was a father. A collective gasp rippled through the church. Heads whipped around, searching for me in the back row, but Patricia raised her hand to silence the murmurs. She pointed directly at Amber and the little boy playing with a toy in the front pew. For years my son suffered in a loveless, empty marriage. Patricia proclaimed, her voice echoing loudly through the microphone for everyone to hear. He longed for a legacy. He longed for the sound of children laughing in his home. But his wife was cold. His wife was barren. She cared more about her spreadsheets and her auditing career than giving my son the family he so desperately deserved. So Thomas found love elsewhere. He found true family. I want everyone here today to welcome Amber and to welcome my beautiful grandson, the true legacy of Thomas. They are the ones who will carry on his name and his wealth. The cruelty of her words hung in the air like poison. Several of my former mother-in-law's friends nodded in sympathy, shooting me disgusted glares over their shoulders. Derek smirked, clearly enjoying the public execution of my character. Jada looked incredibly pleased with herself, probably calculating how much money the toddler would inherit that she could manage through her fake real estate schemes. They expected me to break down. They expected me to run out of the church in tears, humiliated and utterly defeated by the public revelation of the secret baby. They wanted me broken. But I did not shed a single tear. The cold, analytical part of my brain, the part that had spent years tracing fraudulent funds across international borders, took complete control. I stood up from the back pew. The wooden bench creaked loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Patricia stopped speaking, glaring at me from the podium, daring me to make a scene. I did not yell. I did not curse at her. I did not even look at the mistress. I walked calmly up the side aisle, slipping past the staring faces, and made my way directly into the small, open audio-visual booth near the altar. The church technician looked at me in confusion, but I simply smiled politely and gently moved him aside. I opened my clutch, pulled out my tablet, and plugged the connection cable directly into the church's main overhead projector. The heavy projector hummed to life above the congregation. A bright beam of white light cut through the dim church, casting a massive rectangular glow onto the blank wall directly behind the altar. Patricia turned around, a smug smile plastered on her face, fully expecting to see a heartwarming montage of Thomas holding his secret child. Amber sat up straighter in the front pew, adjusting the toddler on her lap, ready for her public debut as the tragic, beloved widow. Instead, the high-definition image that splashed across the altar was a stark black and white financial document. It was a scanned copy of the Swiss bank statement I had pulled from the safe in Thomas's destroyed home office. A wave of confused whispers rippled through the pews. People squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the columns of dates and massive numbers. I reached over the console in the audio-visual booth and turned on the primary microphone. When I spoke, my voice boomed through the church's surround sound speakers, crystal clear and utterly devoid of mercy. Patricia just told you all that Thomas was a generous provider. I began, my voice echoing over the restless crowd. She told you he wanted to leave a legacy for his true family. Let us take a look at exactly how he was providing that legacy. I tapped the screen of my tablet, highlighting a specific column on the projected document in bright neon yellow. This is a highly secured offshore bank account, I explained calmly. As you can see, over the past 2 years, Thomas made dozens of wire transfers into this account. $10,000 here, $25,000 there. By the time he passed away, the total balance sitting in this offshore haven was just over $200,000. The congregation gasped. $200,000 in cash was a staggering amount of money, especially to the people sitting in the room who knew Thomas was notoriously bad at managing his personal finances. I swiped my finger across the tablet, zooming in on the beneficiary section of the document. The name Amber was stamped clearly at the top right next to the routing numbers. He did not just hide this money from his legal wife. I continued, letting the words sink into the silent room. He funneled it away to fund a secret life, leaving me to pay the mortgage and his mounting credit card debts. He built his legacy on a foundation of absolute deceit. Down at the front of the church, the smugness completely melted off Patricia's face. She stared at the screen in horror. Amber, however, suddenly looked incredibly proud. She lifted her chin, clutching the baby tighter, as if the massive stolen fortune somehow validated her position. She actually thought the money was hers to keep, but it was Jada who reacted the most violently. As a luxury realtor, Jada understood financial documents, and she understood the catastrophic legal implications of offshore wire transfers being broadcasted in a public setting. She shot up from her seat, her designer heels scraping loudly against the wooden floorboards. "Turn it off!" Jada shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. She pointed wildly at the audio-visual booth. "Derek, get up there and pull the plug. Cut the power right now. This is illegal. You cannot show this." Derek snapped out of his shock and started sprinting up the side aisle toward the booth, his face red with fury. Several of Thomas's corporate colleagues who were sitting in the middle rows stood up to get a better look at the screen. I knew I only had a few seconds before Derek breached the booth and physically ripped the cables out of the wall. I did not panic. I simply tapped my screen one last time. The projection zoomed in aggressively on the left side of the ledger, highlighting the origin accounts for every single wire transfer. I leaned directly into the microphone. "You should look closely at where that money came from," I said, raising my voice just enough to drown out Jada's screaming. "Thomas did not earn that $200,000. He did not save it from his paycheck. I want every single person sitting in the corporate section today to read those routing numbers." A deafening silence fell over the middle pews. Then a man in a gray suit, the vice president of Thomas's firm, let out a loud, shocked expletive. "That money did not belong to Thomas," I announced, delivering the final crushing blow. "He embezzled every single penny of it from his employer's corporate accounts. Your golden boy was a corporate thief. And Amber, that money you think is yours is currently sitting in a frozen account under federal investigation." Derek burst into the audio-visual booth, panting and furious, but he was entirely too late. The bomb had already detonated. The legacy Patricia had just spent 10 minutes praising was completely and permanently destroyed. The vice president of Thomas's firm did not wait for an explanation. He stood up, adjusted his suit jacket, and pulled out his cell phone, marching straight down the center aisle and out the heavy oak doors. The rest of the corporate colleagues immediately followed his lead, murmuring frantically to one another. Within seconds, the middle section of the church was completely empty. They were distancing themselves from the crime scene before the authorities arrived. Down at the front pew, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on Amber. The proud, triumphant posture she had held just moments ago completely vanished. She looked up at the massive projection on the wall, her eyes darting between the six-figure sum and the routing numbers. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Patricia. The betrayal in Amber's eyes was palpable. She had been promised a life of luxury, and now she was staring down the barrel of a corporate embezzlement scandal. "You told me he was rich," Amber hissed. Her voice pierced the stunned silence of the remaining congregation. You sat in my apartment and told me Thomas came from a wealthy family. You promised me the money in that account was a trust fund for my son. Patricia frantically waved her hands, her face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. Keep your voice down, you foolish girl, Patricia whispered harshly, grabbing Amber's arm. People are staring. We will discuss this at home. Amber ripped her arm away from Patricia's grasp, nearly dropping the toddler. There is no home, Amber screamed. Her voice echoed off the stained glass windows. Thomas told me he was leaving his awful wife to buy us a mansion. You told me to just wait until he passed away so we could claim the inheritance. But this is stolen money. I cannot touch stolen money. They will arrest me. The congregation erupted into loud gasps. Patricia stumbled backward, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Derek rushed down from the aisle, trying to shield his mother, while Jada practically hid behind a large floral arrangement to avoid being associated with the screaming mistress. You listen to me, you little gold digger! Patricia snapped, completely dropping her grieving mother facade. Her true, vicious nature clawed its way to the surface. My son gave you everything. He gave you a child. He gave you a future. If you think for 1 second you can stand in this church and humiliate my family, you are sorely mistaken. You are nothing but a cheap mistake. Amber let out a high-pitched laugh that sounded bordering on hysterical. She stepped right up to the edge of the mahogany casket, pointing a shaking finger directly at Patricia's face. A mistake. You helped him hide me for 2 years. You bought my groceries with your credit card so his wife would not see the charges. You promised me that if I kept my mouth shut and played along today, you would make sure my son never had to work a day in his life. Well, guess what, Patricia? You are going to pay me. If that offshore money is dirty, you are going to pay my child support out of your own pocket every single month. I am not paying you a single dime! Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing violently over the open casket of her deceased son. I owe you nothing. The two women stood inches apart, screaming vicious insults at each other over the dead body of the man who had lied to them both. It was a pathetic, disgusting display of greed. The remaining family members watched in absolute horror as the beautiful, dignified funeral Patricia had planned descended into a chaotic street brawl. I calmly unplugged my tablet from the projection system. The bright numbers vanished from the wall, plunging the altar back into dim, somber lighting. I picked up my clutch and walked slowly down the side aisle. The crowd parted for me automatically. Nobody dared to look me in the eye. I approached the front pew, stopping just a few feet away from the screaming match. Both women fell completely silent the second I stepped into their line of sight. Amber clutched her baby to her chest, breathing heavily, while Patricia glared at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. I would not worry about negotiating child support right now, Amber, I said smoothly, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. I would be much more worried about retaining a very good federal defense attorney. Amber's eyes widened in panic. What are you talking about? I did not steal anything. Thomas transferred that money. I did not even know the passwords. I offered her a cold, empty smile. Ignorance is not a defense when your name is listed as the sole beneficiary on an account funded by corporate theft. But that is not even the worst part. As a forensic auditor, I have a legal obligation to report massive financial irregularities. I submitted this entire file to the Criminal Division of the Internal Revenue Service yesterday afternoon. They froze that offshore account 12 hours ago. You are not a wealthy mother, Amber. By accepting those wire transfers, you are officially an accomplice to federal wire fraud. Amber's knees buckled. She collapsed into the wooden pew, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her impending arrest finally took hold. I did not offer her a tissue. I simply turned to look at Patricia, whose mouth was hanging open in sheer terror. The destruction of their secret world was only just beginning. The reception following the funeral was held in the small, outdated banquet hall adjacent to the church. The atmosphere was painfully awkward and suffocatingly quiet. With the entire corporate section having fled the scene to distance themselves from the embezzlement scandal, and most of the extended family, too embarrassed by the screaming match at the altar to stick around the room, felt more like a waiting area for a dental procedure than a celebration of life. I poured myself a cup of black coffee from a plastic urn and stood near the back exit, quietly observing the absolute wreckage I had just orchestrated. Patricia was sitting alone in a folding chair in the corner, staring blankly at the floor in a state of catatonic shock. Derek was pacing frantically outside the glass doors, aggressively making phone calls to anyone who would listen. I was just about to throw my paper cup in the trash and leave this miserable family behind forever when the sharp, aggressive clicking of designer heels approached me from behind. I did not even need to turn around to know it was Jada. She stormed right up to me, her face pinched with a toxic mixture of greed and desperate fury. She reached out and grabbed my arm, attempting to physically pull me further into the shadows of the hallway so the few remaining guests would not hear her outburst. I immediately yanked my arm out of her grip and leveled her with a look so cold it made her take a physical step back. "You think you have won, Nora?" Jada hissed, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You think because you embarrassed Patricia and ruined that stupid girl in front of the whole church that you are walking away the victor today. You just cost our family millions of dollars in corporate life insurance and offshore funds. You caused severe emotional distress to a grieving mother. Do you really have any idea how easy it is for me to sue you for that?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "You cannot sue me for projecting a bank statement that my late husband willingly created, Jada. The truth is an absolute legal defense to defamation, and as for emotional distress, I think Patricia brought that entirely upon herself." Jada scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her expensive black dress and leaning in close to my face. "You are just a glorified number cruncher, Nora. You sit in a gray cubicle and play with spreadsheets all day. I sell luxury estates to the top 1% of this city. I deal with high-powered attorneys and massive contracts every single day. I know the legal loopholes. I know exactly how the justice system works. If you do not list that house by Monday morning and agree to split the cash proceeds directly with Derek and me, I will personally see to it that you are tied up in probate court for the next 10 years. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are begging to live on the street. I will take everything you have." I let her finish her pathetic rant. It was almost sad watching her cling to her fake superiority when her entire foundation was crumbling. I calmly opened my small black clutch and reached inside. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Jada," I said, my tone eerily pleasant and completely devoid of fear. "I am a number cruncher. And because I am so exceptionally good at crunching numbers, I decided to take a very close look at your luxury real estate brokerage while I was investigating my husband's missing money." The arrogant smirk on Jada's face faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" she snapped defensively. I pulled out a thick, tri-folded document stamped with the official red seal of the State Real Estate Commission and held it out to her. "Did you really think Thomas was smart enough to figure out how to wire stolen corporate funds to a highly secured Swiss bank account all by himself?" I asked quietly. Thomas did not know the first thing about international finance. He needed a registered escrow account to wash the money first. And according to my forensic audit, he used your brokerage's client escrow accounts to do it. You mix dirty money with clean real estate transactions. That is textbook money laundering, Jada. Jada snatched the document from my hand, her eyes frantically scanning the bold text at the top of the page. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint right there in the hallway. "That piece of paper is a formal legal summons," I whispered, stepping right into her personal space. "Your luxury brokerage is currently being audited by both the state licensing board and the federal government. They are seizing your hard drives as we speak. Have fun dealing with those high-powered attorneys now." I left Jada standing frozen in the dingy hallway of the church reception, the legal summons shaking in her manicured hands. I did not wait to see if she would burst into tears or vomit. I simply turned around, walked out the glass doors into the crisp afternoon air, and drove back to my house. The house they had tried to steal from me. For 3 days there was complete silence from my in-laws. No threatening text messages, no late-night phone calls, and no more attempts to break down my front door. But I knew Patricia too well. A narcissist backed into a corner does not surrender. They just look for a new weapon. On Thursday morning, that weapon arrived in the form of a certified letter delivered to my porch. It was an urgent summons to attend a formal reading of a newly discovered addition to my late husband's will. The meeting was scheduled for that very afternoon. The address listed on the letterhead did not belong to a prestigious downtown law firm. It led me to a rundown strip mall on the edge of town, sandwiched between a discount liquor store and a laundromat. The gold lettering on the glass door read Gallagher and Associates, but the office inside smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap carpet cleaner. When I walked into the cramped conference room, Patricia and Derek were already seated across the scratched wooden table. Jada was there too, but she was sitting as far away from the table as possible. She looked physically ill, her eyes darting nervously around the room, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. She knew exactly what I was capable of, but clearly she had not warned her husband or her mother-in-law. Patricia, on the other hand, looked incredibly smug. She wore a bright, triumphant smile, her posture radiating absolute arrogance. The desperate, humiliated woman from the funeral was completely gone. Attorney Gallagher, a sweaty man in a poorly fitted brown suit, entered the room and dropped a thin manila folder onto the table. He did not offer condolences. He immediately opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "We are here to discuss a legally binding codicil to the last will and testament of Thomas," Mr. Gallagher announced, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. This amendment was signed and notarized just 4 weeks before his passing. Patricia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Thomas realized the error of his ways before he died. "Nora," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "he knew you were going to try to leave us with nothing. He knew you were a greedy, vindictive woman, so he made sure to protect his real family. Tell her, Mr. Gallagher. Tell her what my son left me." The lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Thomas held an executive corporate life insurance policy through his employer. The payout value upon his death is exactly $5 million. According to this new codicil, Thomas has revoked his wife as the primary beneficiary. The $5 million is now to be split evenly, 50-50 between his mother Patricia and his brother Derek. Derek let out a loud, obnoxious cheer, slamming his fist onto the table. "I knew it," Derek laughed, pointing a finger at me. "I knew he would not leave us hanging. $5 million. We are going to buy a mansion in the hills. We are going to buy a yacht. You get absolutely nothing, Nora. You can take your little spreadsheets and your attitude and go back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of." Patricia reached over and patted Derek's hand, her eyes locked onto mine, waiting for me to explode. She was waiting for the tears, the screaming, the desperate pleas for a share of the money. She thought she had just dealt the ultimate death blow to my financial stability. She thought she had won the war. Mr. Gallagher looked at me, a fake expression of sympathy on his sweaty face. "Now, as the legal spouse, you do have the right to file an injunction," he explained slowly. "You can contest this codicil in probate court. It will be a very long, very expensive legal battle. My clients are fully prepared to fight you for years if necessary. So the question is, do you intend to contest this document?" The room went dead silent. Patricia smirked. Derek crossed his arms, ready for a fight. Jada just stared on the floor, sweating profusely. I reached into my purse, pulled out a small bottle of sparkling water and twisted off the cap. I took a slow, refreshing sip, letting the carbonation fizz quietly in the silent room. I set the bottle down on the scratched wooden table and looked directly at the lawyer. "No," I said smoothly. "I do not intend to contest it at all. In fact, I insist they take the $5 million right now. Where do I sign to officially waive my rights?" Mr. Gallagher stared at me, his sweaty brow wrinkling in absolute confusion. He had clearly prepared for a massive screaming match. He had drafted injunction warnings and practically braced himself for me to throw my sparkling water across his desk. Instead, I was calmly asking for a pen to surrender $5 million. Are you absolutely certain? Mr. Gallagher asked, his voice wavering slightly as he looked between me and his arrogant clients. Once you sign the waiver of contest, you forfeit all legal claims to the payout. You cannot change your mind tomorrow or next week. It is an irrevocable decision. I am entirely certain, I replied, holding my hand out for the document. Patricia let out a loud, breathless laugh. She leaned back in her cheap leather conference chair, clasping her hands over her chest, as if she had just witnessed a divine miracle. I knew it, she gloated loudly, her voice echoing in the cramped room. I knew you were too weak to fight us in a real courtroom. You are nothing but a coward, Nora. You finally realize you have no power here, and no money to hire a lawyer to fight us. Thomas knew you were useless in the end. Derek eagerly snatched the heavy brass pen from the lawyer's desk. He practically hovered over the acceptance papers, his eyes wide with unfiltered, desperate greed. $5 million, Derek muttered to himself, signing his name with aggressive, sweeping strokes. This changes everything for me. I am quitting my dead-end job tomorrow morning. I am buying that beachfront condo I always wanted. Thomas really came through for his true family. He passed the pen to his mother. Patricia signed her name meticulously, treating the scratched conference table like it was a royal signing ceremony. As she wrote, Jada shifted in her seat. Jada had been absolutely terrified of me just 48 hours ago when I handed her the audit summons for her real estate brokerage. But the intoxicating promise of millions of dollars had clearly overridden her survival instincts. She had probably calculated that a $5 million windfall could pay for the best defense attorneys in the state to save her real estate license and keep her out of federal prison. Jada pulled out her phone and started tapping the screen aggressively. I am already putting down the reservation deposit for a custom Tesla Model X. Jada announced, a smug, triumphant smile returning to her face as she looked at her husband, the white one with the pristine white interior. We deserve an immediate lifestyle upgrade after everything this pathetic woman has put us through this week. I did not respond to any of their insults. I simply took the waiver document from Mr. Gallagher when he slid it across the table. I read every single line with the practiced, meticulous eye of a forensic auditor. The legal phrasing was airtight. By signing it, I formally and permanently removed my name from Thomas's estate regarding this specific corporate insurance policy. I was legally severing myself from the asset entirely, which was exactly what I needed to do to survive the financial bloodbath that was about to happen. I uncapped my own pen and signed my name on the dotted line. The lawyer took the documents back, checked all 3 signatures to ensure everything was properly executed, and pressed his heavy state notary stamp onto the bottom of each page. The loud thud of the ink stamp echoed in the small room with extreme finality. It was done. The ink was dry. The trap was permanently set and locked. Congratulations, Mr. Gallagher said, forcing a polite professional smile toward Patricia and Derek. You are now the sole undisputed beneficiaries of Thomas's executive corporate life insurance policy. I will submit these acceptance documents to the corporate insurance provider immediately to begin the payout process. Patricia stood up proudly, smoothing the wrinkles from her black skirt. Come along, Derek, she commanded with a regal wave of her hand. We have an investment bank to visit, and I think we should go out for a celebratory lunch. We have finally excised the cancer from this family. They turned to leave the conference room, completely ignoring my existence as if I had already faded into obscurity. Mr. Gallagher began sliding the finalized paperwork back into his thick manila folder. I stayed seated. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. Before you file those acceptance documents with the state, Mr. Gallagher, I said, my voice cutting sharply through the celebratory chatter at the door. Did you happen to read the specific corporate liability riders attached to Thomas's executive policy? The lawyer paused, his hand hovering awkwardly over the folder. What do you mean? He asked. Derek scoffed from the doorway. Stop trying to ruin our moment, Nora. You signed the waiver. You lost. Get over it. I kept my eyes locked squarely on the lawyer. I mean, Mr. Gallagher, did you inform your clients about the fidelity bond clause attached to corporate policies involving felony embezzlement? Mr. Gallagher froze completely. The thick manila folder in his hands suddenly seemed to weigh 100 pounds. He slowly lowered it back onto the scratched wooden table, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Fidelity bond clause, he repeated, his voice losing all its previous professional confidence. What exactly are you implying, Mrs. Hayes? Patricia and Derek stopped dead in their tracks near the office door. Patricia let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically. Do not listen to her, Mr. Gallagher. She is just bitter and trying to stall the payout with some fake legal jargon. Come on, Derek, our lunch reservation is in 20 minutes. But Derek did not move. He was looking at his wife. Jada had suddenly gone rigid. As a real estate broker who dealt with complex contracts and escrow accounts on a daily basis, she recognized the term. The smug smile regarding her new Tesla vanished instantly, replaced by a look of dawning horror. A fidelity bond. Jada whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the back of the lawyer's head. It is a form of corporate insurance. It protects businesses from financial losses caused by the fraudulent or dishonest acts of their own employees. I gave Jada a slow, approving nod. Exactly. You are finally using your license for something useful, Jada. I turned my attention back to the sweating attorney. Thomas was a senior executive, Mr. Gallagher. His life insurance policy was fully sponsored and funded by his employer. But what my late husband failed to realize when he drafted that greedy little codicil was that corporate-sponsored policies carry very specific liability riders. When an employee is found guilty of felony embezzlement, the primary beneficiary of their life insurance policy is no longer their family. It is the corporation. The lawyer frantically flipped open his folder and began tearing through the dense pages of the insurance contract, his finger tracing the tiny print at the bottom of the policy addendums. His face grew paler with every line he read. What is she talking about? Patricia demanded, marching back toward the table. Her arrogant facade was beginning to crack. Tell her to shut up. Thomas left that money to us. We have the signed amendment. You have a signed amendment claiming the entirety of Thomas's financial estate. I corrected her smoothly. But Thomas's estate is currently under a massive federal investigation. You were both at the funeral. You saw the offshore bank statements. Thomas stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company to fund his mistress. And that was just the cash I found in his personal safe. When a forensic auditor actually digs into the corporate accounts, the total amount of stolen funds, plus the accrued IRS tax penalties, wire fraud fines, and corporate legal fees, is astronomical. Mr. Gallagher finally looked up from the paperwork. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. She is right, the lawyer croaked, his voice cracking. Clause 42, Section B. In the event of documented corporate theft, the insurance payout acts as a liability shield. The funds are automatically diverted to the employer for full financial restitution. Derek let out a nervous, barking laugh. Okay, fine. So the company takes back the 200 grand he stole. That still leaves $4.8 million for Mom and me. We are still millionaires. I actually laughed out loud at his sheer mathematical ignorance. Derek, you really should have paid more attention in school instead of letting Patricia do your homework. I told you 200,000 was just what he hid for Amber. The actual corporate deficit Thomas caused over the last 5 years is staggering. And by aggressively filing those acceptance papers today, you and Patricia did not just claim his remaining assets. You legally accepted full responsibility for his estate. You accepted his liabilities. The room plunged into a suffocating, terrifying silence. The only sound was the hum of the cheap air conditioning unit in the window. By signing that document, you presented yourselves as the primary financial guarantors of a fraudulent estate, I explained, savoring every single syllable. The corporate lawyers will not just take the insurance money. When the policy payout inevitably falls short of the total restitution and federal fines, they are coming directly after the signed beneficiaries for the remaining balance. They will garnish your wages. They will place liens on your properties. They will liquidate your retirement accounts. Jada let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She lunged forward, grabbing Derek's arm. You idiot, she screamed, digging her nails into his jacket. You just tied my name and my assets to a massive corporate debt. My brokerage is already being audited, and now you just made us personally liable for federal restitution. Derek tried to pull away, stammering incoherently, but Patricia was completely speechless. She slumped into the nearest chair, her hands shaking violently as she stared at the signed documents on the table. The $5 million windfall she thought was her ultimate victory had just transformed into a financial death sentence. I reached down into my heavy leather tote bag and pulled out a massive, tightly bound stack of documents. It was 400 pages long, filled with spreadsheets, banking traces, and federal tax codes. I lifted the massive binder and dropped it onto the scratched wooden table. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel striking a judge's block. This is the completed forensic audit of Thomas's corporate accounts, I said, looking down at the people who had made my life a living hell. You do not get $5 million. After the insurance policy is drained, you owe the corporation an additional $2.5 million in out-of-pocket restitution. Have fun with the debt collectors. Jada stared at the massive binder sitting on the scratched wooden table. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble so violently that her heavy diamond rings clinked against each other. The suffocating reality of $2.5 million in federal and corporate debt crashed down on her like a concrete block. In our state, debts incurred during the marriage, especially those tied to jointly managed entities like the LLC Derek had just transferred his assets into, were considered shared marital burdens. Jada's pristine credit score, her luxury car leases, and her high-end real estate brokerage were now directly tethered to a sinking ship of catastrophic proportions. "You absolute idiot!" Jada shrieked. She spun around and shoved Derek so hard in the chest that he stumbled backward into the office door. "I told you not to rush this. I told you to wait until probate cleared. But no, you and your greedy mother just had to have the cash today. You just signed away my entire life." Derek threw his hands up, his eyes darting frantically between his furious wife and the silent, sweating lawyer. "Calm down, Jada. We can fight this. We will hire a defense attorney. We will declare bankruptcy. We can restructure the LLC. Jada let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a scream. "Declare bankruptcy? Are you out of your mind? I sell multi-million-dollar estates, Derek. My entire clientele is based on financial prestige and trust. If my name is attached to a Chapter 7 bankruptcy tied to a federal embezzlement case, my career is over. I will lose my broker's license. I will lose everything." Patricia finally found her voice. She pulled herself up from the chair, pointing a shaking finger at Jada. "Do not you dare speak to my son that way. This is your fault too. You were the one who forged the power of attorney. You were the one who wanted the insurance money to buy a new car. You are in this just as deep as we are." "I am not in anything with you people," Jada snarled, her voice dripping with absolute venom. She turned her back on Patricia and glared at Derek. "I am filing for divorce the second I walk out of this cheap office. I will not let you drag my credit score into the gutter to pay for your dead brother's dirty secrets. You cannot just walk away," Derek yelled, his face turning bright red. "We are married. Our assets are merged. If the corporate lawyers come for me, they are coming for your brokerage accounts too. We share the investment properties. You are going down with me." Jada's panic suddenly morphed into a chilling, triumphant smirk. She crossed her arms, looking at her husband with complete and utter disgust. "Do you honestly think I am stupid enough to trust you with my money, Derek? I saw this coming for years. You and your mother have always been financial parasites. That is why I never put my name on that stupid LLC." Derek blinked, completely blindsided by his wife's sudden shift in tone. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the investment properties," Jada declared, proudly puffing her chest out. "I am talking about the escrow overflow accounts and the deed to our house. They are not in my name, Derek. I transferred all of the deeds and the liquid cash into my mother's trust account 3 months ago. I put my mother's name on everything. My assets are completely hidden. The corporate lawyers cannot touch a single dime of my money because legally I do not own any of it. My mother does. You and Patricia can rot in federal debt for the rest of your lives, but I am walking away clean." She looked incredibly pleased with herself. In her blind panic to throw her husband under the bus and protect her own ego, Jada had just proudly confessed to one of the most severe financial crimes a licensed professional could commit: fraudulent conveyance. Hiding marital assets from a spouse and potential creditors by illegally transferring them to a third party. I slowly reached into the side pocket of my leather tote bag. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing brightly in the dim conference room. I tapped the large red square in the center of the screen, stopping the voice recording app that had been running since the moment I walked into the office. The loud digital chime of the recording saving echoed off the thin walls. Jada froze. Her triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror as she stared at the device in my hand. "Thank you, Jada," I said smoothly, slipping the phone back into my bag. The State Real Estate Board absolutely loves hearing about intentional asset hiding and fraudulent conveyance. I am sure the divorce court judge and the IRS auditors will be equally thrilled to listen to this tape. I walked out of Mr. Gallagher's office without looking back. I left Jada staring at my phone in absolute horror, while Derek and Patricia remained trapped in the reality of their massive new debt. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove away. The trap had been triggered, but the true devastation was going to take a few hours to completely materialize. By the next morning, the corporate legal team moved with ruthless efficiency. They immediately executed a total freeze on all financial accounts associated with the registered beneficiaries of the life insurance policy. Patricia had confidently walked into her local bank branch, expecting to withdraw cash for her luxurious new lifestyle. Instead, she was informed that her checking, savings, and retirement accounts were entirely locked, pending a federal corporate audit. Panicked, humiliated, and suddenly completely broke, Patricia did the only thing she knew how to do. She packed her Louis Vuitton suitcases and drove straight to her golden child. I knew exactly where she was heading. As a forensic auditor, anticipating the movements of desperate people is part of the job description. I decided to take a scenic drive through Derek and Jada's upscale neighborhood. I parked my car against the curb a few houses down from their pristine manicured lawn, rolled down my window, and enjoyed the front row seat to the absolute destruction of their family dynamic. Patricia had parked her luxury sedan haphazardly across the driveway. She was currently dragging two massive, heavy suitcases toward the front porch. Derek was standing on the front steps, looking like a terrified little boy, while Jada stood firmly in the doorway, physically blocking the entrance with her body. "You are not bringing those bags into my house!" Jada screamed. Her voice carried clearly down the quiet suburban street. "Take your luggage and get off my property right now." Patricia stopped halfway up the walkway, her face turning a deep shade of purple. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Patricia shrieked, dropping the heavy suitcases onto the concrete. "I am your mother-in-law. My accounts have been temporarily frozen because of a massive misunderstanding. I am staying in the guest room until the bank clears this up. Derek, tell your wife to move out of the doorway." Derek swallowed hard and took a hesitant step toward Jada. "Come on, Jada," he pleaded, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "It is just for a few days. She is my mother. We cannot just leave her on the street. She has nowhere else to go." Jada let out a vicious, mocking laugh that echoed off the neighboring houses. She stepped forward, pointing an aggressive finger directly at Derek's chest. "Your mother is a walking federal liability, Derek. She just signed a document making herself responsible for $2.5 million in stolen corporate funds. If I let her establish legal residency in my house, the corporate lawyers will use it as leverage to put a lien on this property. I told you yesterday I am filing for divorce. I am not letting either of you drag my credit score down with you. She is not coming inside, and frankly, neither are you." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest in a dramatic display of victimhood. "You selfish, ungrateful woman," Patricia yelled. "My son Thomas paid for this lifestyle. My family elevated you." Before Jada could scream back, an unfamiliar white sedan pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind Patricia's blocked car. A tall man in a plain gray suit stepped out of the vehicle. He held a thick, bright yellow envelope in his hand. He walked briskly up the driveway, completely ignoring the screaming match happening on the porch. "Excuse me," the man said loudly, cutting through the chaos. "Are you Patricia Hayes?" Patricia turned around, fixing her posture to look dignified despite the public meltdown. "Yes, I am. Who are you?" The man shoved the yellow envelope directly into Patricia's hands. "You have been officially served," he announced flatly. He immediately turned around, walked back to his white sedan, and drove away. Derek rushed down the porch steps to his mother's side. "What is it, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Is it from the corporate lawyers already?" Patricia ripped open the envelope with shaking hands. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy green paper. Her eyes scanned the first page, and all the color completely drained from her face. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing Derek to catch her by the arm. "This makes no sense," Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is a foreclosure notice from the bank. They are seizing my house. But Thomas paid my mortgage in full every single month. He promised me the house was safe. I could not resist the opportunity." I opened my car door, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and spoke loudly enough for all three of them to hear. "Thomas stopped paying your mortgage 6 months ago." "Patricia," I called out, walking slowly toward the edge of their driveway. "The money he usually sent to your bank was suddenly redirected. He needed the extra cash to pay the lease on Amber's luxury downtown apartment and buy designer clothes for his secret baby. Your beloved son chose his mistress over your roof, and now the bank is taking it back. You are officially homeless." I rolled up my window, shifted my car into drive, and slowly pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I watched the absolute collapse of the Hayes family hierarchy. Derek was holding his mother as she sobbed on her designer luggage, while Jada stood on the porch furiously dialing her divorce attorney. But the universe was not quite finished delivering its justice for the day. Before I even reached the end of their pristine suburban street, a beat-up yellow taxi swerved around my car and slammed its brakes right in front of Jada's driveway. I parked at the stop sign just to watch the final act of this driveway drama unfold. The back door of the cab swung open. Out stepped Amber, clutching her crying toddler in one arm and dragging 2 cheap plastic garbage bags full of clothes with the other. The taxi driver yelled at her from the window for the unpaid fare, but she ignored him, marching straight up the driveway toward Patricia. The frozen offshore accounts and the federal investigation had clearly caught up to her luxury downtown apartment. She had been abruptly evicted, and she was looking for the millionaire family she had been promised. I could hear the screaming from a block away. Jada marched down the porch steps, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. She demanded to know why her dead husband's mistress was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn. Amber completely ignored Jada and cornered Patricia. She screamed that federal agents had raided her apartment that morning, seizing everything bought with the stolen corporate funds. She demanded that Patricia take her in and provide for the baby, just like she had promised in front of the entire church at the funeral. Patricia, still clutching her own bank foreclosure notice, looked at Amber with absolute disgust. The grand illusion of her golden grandson was entirely gone, replaced by the harsh reality that this young woman and her baby were the reason Patricia had lost her own home. Thomas had stopped paying his mother's mortgage to pay for Amber's extravagant lifestyle. Patricia screamed that Amber was a parasite who had ruined her son's life. Amber screamed back that Patricia was a liar and an enabler who had helped Thomas hide the affair for years. Jada yelled at both of them, blaming Patricia for raising a thief and blaming Amber for bringing the federal government to her doorstep. Derek just stood there on the grass, completely paralyzed by the 3 screaming women. The brutal truth quickly settled over the driveway. None of them had a single dollar of accessible liquid cash. Patricia's accounts were locked by the corporate lawyers. Amber's offshore trust was seized by the Internal Revenue Service. Jada had transferred all her assets into her mother's name to hide them from the $2.5 million debt, leaving her with no immediate funds to pay for a hotel or even a lawyer without exposing her own fraudulent conveyance. They were completely trapped. Three arrogant, greedy women who had spent the last 2 years actively destroying my life were now bound together by absolute poverty and mutual hatred. As the sun began to set, the screaming eventually turned into desperate, panicked plotting. I sat in my car listening to the muffled arguments carrying down the quiet street. Jada paced back and forth across the grass, chewing nervously on her thumbnail. She needed cash for a retainer fee to save her real estate license before the state board stripped it away. Patricia needed cash to hire a defense attorney before the authorities officially indicted her for the forged power of attorney. Amber just needed cash to buy baby formula and a motel room. It was Patricia who finally said my name. Even from a distance, I could see the malicious gleam return to her eyes. She pointed a shaking finger in the direction of my neighborhood. She reminded Jada and Derek about my private collection of vintage estate jewelry. Over the years, I had carefully invested my corporate bonuses into high-value certified antique pieces. Patricia knew I kept a heavy velvet box in my master bedroom closet that was easily worth over $100,000 in untraceable pawnable gold and diamonds. Jada stopped pacing. The idea of stealing my hard-earned investments to save her own skin was clearly too tempting to resist. Amber, desperate and having absolutely nothing left to lose, nodded eagerly in agreement. They reasoned that because I lived alone and was supposedly just a boring corporate auditor, my house would be an incredibly easy target. I watched in amusement as the three women who despised each other just moments ago suddenly formed a pathetic criminal alliance. They agreed to wait until midnight, assuming I would be fast asleep, to break into my house and strip it of everything valuable. I smiled, put my car in gear, and drove home to prepare a proper welcome. I knew they would not wait long. Desperation breeds impatience. As soon as I arrived home, I put my plan into motion. I drove my car 2 blocks over and parked it discreetly behind a neighborhood community center, ensuring my driveway was completely empty. I wanted the house to look abandoned, as if the grieving widow had fled to a hotel to escape the painful memories. Then I made a phone call to a high-end private security firm that my auditing company frequently used for executive protection. Within an hour, 2 massive, highly trained security contractors were standing in my living room dressed in tactical black. I paid them double their premium rate in cash for a single night of work. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, took a seat in the plush velvet armchair facing the back patio, and waited in total darkness. At exactly midnight, the silent screen of my tablet illuminated. A notification from my backyard security camera popped up. Motion detected at the rear patio. I tapped the screen and watched the high-definition night vision feed. 3 figures were creeping through my backyard, illuminated in eerie green light. It was Patricia, Jada, and Derek. I smiled to myself. They must have left Amber in the getaway car with the baby, realizing they needed Derek's brute strength to actually breach the reinforced doors. Derek was holding a heavy metal crowbar, looking absolutely terrified, as he tiptoed across the manicured grass. Jada was whispering harshly at him, her face twisted in determination. "Just break the lock, Derek," she hissed, her voice clearly picked up by the sensitive outdoor microphones. "Her car is not in the driveway. She is probably crying in some cheap motel across town. We just need to get in, grab the velvet box from the master closet, and get out. It will take 2 minutes." Patricia stood behind them, shivering in the cool night air, clutching her expensive coat around her shoulders. "Do not dawdle, Derek," Patricia commanded nervously, constantly looking over her shoulder. "If we get that jewelry, we can pawn it tomorrow morning. I can hire my defense attorney, and we can finally be done with this nightmare. Just smash the glass if you have to." Derek hesitated, staring at the heavy double-paned sliding glass door that led directly into my dark living room. "If the alarm goes off, the cops will be here in 5 minutes, he whispered back. "She does not set the alarm when she is out of town," Jada snapped, pushing Derek aggressively toward the door. "Thomas told me she always forgets the passcode. Just do it. We have absolutely zero cash, Derek. We are desperate. Break the glass. I watched the screen as Derek raised the heavy metal crowbar. He hesitated for one more second, his cowardly nature battling against the sheer financial ruin staring him in the face. But the pressure from his wife and his mother was too much. He swung the crowbar forward with all his might. The sound of shattering glass tore through the silent suburban night. The heavy panes spiderwebbed and completely caved in thousands of sharp shards raining down onto the hardwood floor of my living room. The crash was deafening, but my house alarm did not trigger. I had manually disabled it from my phone an hour ago. I wanted them to step fully inside. I wanted them to cross the threshold of no return. Derek reached through the jagged hole, found the interior latch, and unlocked the door. He slid the heavy frame open. The cool night wind swept into my living room, carrying the scent of broken glass and absolute desperation. Derek stepped inside first, his heavy boots crunching loudly over the debris. Jada followed closely behind him, her eyes darting toward the hallway that led to the master bedroom. Patricia stepped in last, brushing some remaining glass from the doorframe to protect her coat. They stood in my dark living room, breathing heavily, entirely convinced they had just successfully executed the perfect burglary. They thought they were alone. They thought they had finally outsmarted me and secured the funds to save themselves from federal prison. I set my teacup down on the small glass table next to my armchair. The soft clink of the porcelain made Derek freeze in his tracks. I reached over to the smart home remote resting on my lap and flicked the master switch. Instantly, 6 high-intensity LED floodlights mounted across the living room ceiling snapped on, flooding the room with blinding stadium-level brightness. Derek threw his hands over his face, frantically adjusted to the sudden glaring light. The three of them froze in absolute terror. I was sitting comfortably in my armchair directly in front of them, my legs crossed, a pleasant smile on my face. And standing directly behind my chair, arms folded across their broad chests, were the two massive private security contractors staring them down with cold, professional menace. The absolute silence in my living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The three of them stood frozen like statues among the shattered glass, their eyes wide with sheer terror as they stared at the two massive security contractors flanking my armchair. Patricia actually dropped her expensive leather handbag. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, spilling lipstick and loose change into the debris. Jada stopped breathing altogether, her hands trembling as she slowly raised them to her chest. Derek, still clutching the metal crowbar, looked like he was about to physically wet himself. I took another slow, calm sip of my chamomile tea. The warm liquid felt incredibly soothing against the chill of the night air, blowing in through the broken sliding door. I gently placed the porcelain cup back onto the glass table, making sure the delicate clink was the only sound in the room. "Did you honestly believe I would leave my home completely unguarded?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the bright space. "Did you think a forensic auditor, someone whose entire career revolves around predicting the desperate behavior of cornered criminals, would just pack up and cry in a motel room while you raided my closets?" Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, pathetic wheeze came out. The arrogant matriarch who had spent the last decade making me feel utterly worthless was now standing in my living room like a common street thug caught red-handed. "You are entirely predictable." I continued, leaning back comfortably in my velvet armchair. "I knew exactly what would happen today. The corporate lawyers froze your accounts. Jada hid her assets to protect herself, leaving the rest of you with absolutely zero liquid cash. You needed money fast. You needed untraceable funds to pay for your defense attorneys before the federal indictments came down. And Patricia, I knew your greedy mind would immediately go straight to my vintage estate jewelry. It was the only logical target left for people as financially ruined as you." Derek finally found his voice. It was high-pitched and shaking violently. "We did not come here to steal anything," Derek stammered frantically, waving his free hand. "We were just coming to check on you." The door was stuck. I actually laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound that made Derek flinch. You are standing in the middle of my living room at midnight holding a crowbar, Derek. Do not insult my intelligence. But more importantly, do not insult the intelligence of the authorities who are currently watching this exact conversation. I reached over to the side table and picked up my tablet. I turned the glowing screen toward them so they could see it clearly. On the display was a crystal-clear, high-definition live video feed of the four of us. In the top right corner of the screen, a bright red icon was flashing rhythmically next to the word "Live." This is not a standard residential security system, I explained smoothly, making sure to enunciate every word for the microphone. This is an enterprise-grade surveillance network. The footage is not being saved to a hard drive in my garage. It is currently streaming directly to a secure encrypted cloud server. And because I filed a formal harassment complaint against you this afternoon, that server is actively being monitored by law enforcement. They have been watching you since you stepped onto my lawn. You just broadcasted your own felony burglary in high definition. Jada's eyes widened in pure horror. She was a licensed real estate broker. She knew exactly what a felony breaking and entering charge would do to her life. It was not just a financial crime anymore. This was a violent felony. Her career, her freedom, and her pristine reputation were completely annihilated in less than 3 minutes. "We are going to prison," Jada whispered, her voice cracking. Derek panicked. The reality of a prison sentence completely shattered whatever tiny shred of courage he had left. He dropped the heavy metal crowbar onto the floor with a loud clang. Without a single word of warning to his wife or his mother, Derek spun around and sprinted toward the broken sliding glass door. He was going to abandon them both to save his own skin. He did not make it 2 steps. Jada lunged forward with the speed of a cornered animal. She knew that if her husband fled a felony crime scene, the legal consequences for all of them would multiply exponentially. She grabbed the back of Derek's heavy jacket and viciously yanked him backward. She shoved her foot out, hooking it directly behind his ankle. Derek let out a loud shout as his legs flew out from under him. He crashed hard onto the hardwood floor, landing directly in the pile of shattered glass. "I am not going down for you running away," Jada screamed at the top of her lungs, standing over her groaning husband. She immediately threw both of her hands high into the air, turning toward my security contractors. "I surrender. I tried to stop him. I was forced to come here against my will. They made me do it. I surrender!" Patricia screamed in horror as her golden child writhed on the floor in pain, but before she could rush to his side, the sudden deafening wail of sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. Intense flashes of red and blue light painted the walls of my living room, completely washing out the white floodlights. Heavy tires screeched to a halt right on my front lawn. The security contractors immediately stepped forward, moving past Patricia to unbolt my front door. The heavy wooden door swung open and multiple armed officers flooded into the entryway. But as they stepped into the harsh lighting, I noticed their uniforms. They were not the local city police I had expected to respond to a residential burglary alarm. They were wearing dark blue windbreakers with the letters FBI printed across their chests in bright, unmistakable yellow. The heavy tactical boots of the federal agents crunched over the shattered glass of my living room. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern face and graying hair, walked right past Jada, completely ignoring her pathetic surrender. Jada kept her hands raised high in the air, tears streaming down her face, babbling frantically about how she had been forced to break into my house. She thought this was about the burglary. She thought she was going to be booked at the local precinct for a simple breaking and entering charge. She had absolutely no idea how deep the water truly was. The lead agent stopped in the center of the room and pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He did not look at the broken sliding door, and he did not care about the crowbar lying on the floor. He looked directly at Jada. "Jada Washington," the agent said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We are not local police, and we are not here for a residential alarm call. We are executing a federal warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and the falsification of official government documents." Jada stopped crying instantly. Her arms slowly lowered as the sheer magnitude of those words washed over her. "Wire fraud," she whispered, her voice barely leaving her throat. "What are you talking about?" "I did not wire anything. I just wanted the jewelry." The agent unfolded the warrant. Yesterday afternoon, an incredibly detailed forensic audit was submitted to our field office. It outlined the movement of $200,000 from a corporate account to a highly secured offshore bank in Switzerland. Now, moving stolen money is a crime on its own. But what elevated this to our jurisdiction was the paperwork used to bypass the offshore security protocols. Jada stared at him, her chest heaving in absolute panic. "You used your official state notary stamp to authenticate a forged power of attorney," the agent explained smoothly. "You then submitted that document electronically across state lines and international borders to establish a limited liability company and gain access to those stolen funds. Falsifying a notary seal for a local real estate deal is a state crime. Using it to facilitate international money laundering is a federal felony. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Derek, who was still bleeding on the floor from where Jada had tripped him, let out a loud, pathetic sob. He tried to crawl away toward the kitchen, but two agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing him by the shoulders and hauling him to his feet. They slammed him against the wall and forcefully clicked heavy metal handcuffs around his wrists. Derek began screaming for his mother, crying like a terrified child. Patricia watched her golden child get restrained, but she could not move to help him. She was completely paralyzed by the realization that her entire world was collapsing. She tried to maintain her aristocratic posture, lifting her chin and clutching her expensive coat. "This is a massive misunderstanding," Patricia announced, trying to sound dignified despite her trembling voice. "My daughter-in-law made a terrible mistake with her notary stamp. I had absolutely nothing to do with any international wire transfers. I am simply a grieving mother. You have no right to be in this house." The lead agent turned his attention away from Jada and walked slowly toward Patricia. He did not look amused. He looked at her the way someone looks at a cockroach. He pulled a second warrant from his pocket. "Patricia Hayes, you are the primary beneficiary listed on that newly formed limited liability company. You were physically present at the hospital when the forged document was signed, and video surveillance from the hospital corridor shows you handing the pen to your incapacitated son." Patricia took a step back, her mouth opening and closing silently. The agent did not give her a chance to speak. He signaled to another officer who grabbed Patricia's arms and pulled them roughly behind her back. "Mom, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud and criminal possession of a forged instrument. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it." I sat quietly in my armchair, sipping my tea as I watched the three of them get handcuffed and dragged out of my living room. They were sobbing, blaming each other, and begging for mercy that they did not deserve. A few hours later, the chaotic scene in my house had been replaced by the sterile, freezing environment of the FBI field office. I was not sitting in a holding cell. I was sitting in a comfortable leather chair inside a dark observation room. Because my forensic audit was the exact roadmap the federal government needed to crack the embezzlement case, the lead agent had officially brought me in as an expert financial consultant for the corporate fraud division. I had a hot cup of coffee in my hand and a perfect view through the massive two-way mirror taking up the entire front wall. On the other side of the glass was the main interrogation room. The federal agents had decided to put Patricia and Jada in the same room for a few minutes before separating them, a classic psychological tactic designed to break their loyalty to one another. It worked flawlessly. I watched through the mirror as the two women turned on each other like wild animals. Jada was pacing around the metal table, her designer clothes wrinkled and stained with sweat. Patricia was sitting rigidly in a metal chair, her face pale and haggard, under the harsh fluorescent lights. "You need to take the fall for this," Patricia hissed at Jada, pointing a shaking finger. "You are the one who stamped the paper. You are the real estate agent. Tell them you tricked me. Tell them Derek had no idea. You owe us that much." Jada stopped pacing and slammed both of her hands down on the metal table, leaning directly into Patricia's face. "Are you out of your mind?" Jada screamed. "You think I am going to spend 10 years in a federal cell to protect you and your pathetic son? I am telling them everything, Patricia. I am telling them about the life insurance scam. I am telling them about the fake foreclosure." "You know nothing," Patricia snapped back, though her voice was trembling with obvious fear. "You are just a greedy little girl who got caught trying to steal jewelry. No one will believe a word you say." The heavy metal door of the interrogation room swung open and the lead agent walked in. He tossed a thick file onto the table and looked between the two women. "We only need one cooperating witness to secure the federal indictments," the agent said casually. "The first person to give me the full truth gets a recommendation for a reduced sentence. The other one takes the maximum penalty. Who wants to talk?" Jada did not even hesitate for a single second. She practically climbed over the table toward the agent, her eyes wide with desperate survival instinct. "I will tell you everything," Jada cried out, pointing directly at Patricia. "She planned the whole thing. But the power of attorney is not even the worst part." Patricia lunged forward, trying to grab Jada's arm. "Shut your mouth!" Patricia shrieked. The agent pushed Patricia back into her chair and nodded at Jada to continue. Jada took a deep, shaky breath, delivering the ultimate death blow to her mother-in-law. Patricia knew about Thomas having a mistress for 2 entire years, Jada confessed rapidly. Thomas did not know how to hide the stolen corporate money without his wife noticing, so Patricia forced me to help them. She made me set up fake property escrow accounts through my real estate brokerage. We funneled the stolen corporate money into my escrow accounts, and Patricia personally authorized the transfers to the mistress to pay for the baby. She orchestrated the entire money laundering operation. I smiled in the dark observation room. The final piece of the puzzle had just been handed over on a silver platter. Patricia was not just an arrogant mother-in-law anymore. She was the absolute mastermind of a federal money laundering ring. The lead agent turned off the microphone and stepped out of the interrogation room, leaving the heavy metal door cracked open just enough for me to enter. I picked up the thick manila folder resting on the observation console, took a deep breath of the recycled precinct air, and walked down the short hallway. When I pushed the door wide open and stepped into the harsh, blinding light of the interrogation room, both women flinched. They had spent the last 2 years treating me like an invisible, insignificant piece of furniture. Now I was the only thing standing between them and the rest of their lives. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. I did not say a word. I simply raised the thick file and dropped it squarely onto the aluminum table. The loud metallic slap echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot. Jada immediately pressed herself back into her chair, her eyes darting between me and the file. "I told them the truth, Nora." Jada babbled, her voice a desperate high-pitched whine. "I gave them Patricia. I gave them the escrow accounts. I cooperated fully. You heard me right. I helped the investigation. You have to tell the agents to let me go home." I looked down at Jada with absolute pity. "You really do not understand how the federal justice system works, do you, Jada?" I opened the file, revealing a stack of meticulously highlighted sentencing guidelines. "Your confession was incredibly helpful for securing Patricia's indictment. But it does not magically erase the fact that you used your state-issued real estate license to launder stolen corporate funds. The federal prosecutor is not going to just let you walk out the front door." Jada shook her head frantically. "But I made a deal. The agent said I would get a reduced sentence. A reduced sentence is still a sentence." I explained, my voice cold and clinical. "For conspiracy to commit wire fraud, falsifying a government seal, and fraudulent conveyance, the mandatory minimum is 10 years. Because you cooperated, the judge might recommend a reduction to 5 to 7 years in a minimum security federal prison. But your real estate license is permanently revoked as of this morning. Every single asset you tried to hide in your mother's name will be seized by the IRS to pay the corporate restitution. You are going to prison, Jada, and you are going to come out completely bankrupt." Jada's mouth opened in a silent scream. She buried her face in her hands and began sobbing uncontrollably, finally realizing that her luxury lifestyle was completely and permanently over. I turned my attention to Patricia. The matriarch of the family was sitting unnaturally still, staring at the file on the table, as if it were a venomous snake. Her expensive coat was rumpled, her perfect hair was a mess, and the aristocratic superiority she had weaponized against me for years was entirely gone. She looked old, fragile, and utterly defeated. "And then there is you, Patricia," I said, pulling out a copy of the forged power of attorney and placing it right in front of her. "The mastermind. You truly believed you were untouchable. You thought because Thomas was the one stealing the money, your hands were clean. But my audit proved that you were the one authorizing the transfers from Jadis escrow accounts to Amber. You actively directed a money laundering operation to fund your son's infidelity." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping and rolling down her powdered cheek. "When you combine the bank fraud, the forged legal documents, and the fact that you attempted to claim a $5 million corporate life insurance policy under false pretenses, you are facing a massive list of felony charges," I stated, tapping the paper with my index finger. "The prosecutors are pushing for 15 to 20 years. Given your age, Patricia, that is effectively a life sentence. You are never going back to your country club. You are never going back to your high society luncheons. You are going to spend the rest of your life wearing a designated uniform in a concrete cell." Patricia broke. The stoic facade shattered completely. She reached across the metal table, her trembling hands grasping desperately at the sleeves of my jacket. "Please, Nora." Patricia wept, her voice choking on her own tears. "Please, I am begging you. You have the power to stop this. You can tell them the audit was a mistake. You can drop the charges. We are family, Nora. Thomas loved us. Thomas loved you. We are the only family you have left in this world. You cannot send your husband's mother to prison. Please have some mercy on your family." I did not pull my arm away. I stood perfectly still, letting her tears soak into the fabric of my sleeve. I looked down into her desperate, pathetic eyes, remembering the cold hallway of the intensive care unit. I remembered the slap across my face. I leaned in close until my face was only inches from hers, and lowered my voice to a deadly quiet whisper. "You told me at the hospital I was an orphan with no family. You were right, which is why I have absolutely no mercy for you." 3 weeks passed since the night the federal agents raided my living room. The federal wheels of justice turned slowly, but administrative boards operate with brutal efficiency. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I walked into the austere, wood-paneled hearing room of the State Real Estate Commission in downtown. The room was intimidating, designed to make licensed professionals sweat. At the center table sat Jada. She was a ghost of the glamorous, arrogant luxury realtor who had shoved a forged document into my chest at the hospital. Her designer suit hung loosely on her frame. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her manicured nails were chewed down to the quick. She sat next to a cheap court-appointed administrative attorney, as all her hidden assets were currently locked down by the federal government. The disciplinary board consisted of 5 stern-faced commissioners. They did not look amused. The chairman called the hearing to order, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. They were gathered to determine the immediate fate of Jada's professional real estate license following the federal indictments. Jada's lawyer stood up, attempting a pathetic defense. He argued that Jada was a victim of her husband's family, manipulated into signing documents she did not fully understand. He claimed she had no knowledge of the corporate embezzlement and begged the board for leniency, requesting a temporary suspension rather than a permanent revocation. The chairman adjusted his glasses and looked toward the back of the room. "The board calls our expert witness, Mrs. Nora Hayes, to present the findings of her financial audit." I stood up, holding my thick leather-bound audit file. I walked calmly to the witness stand, feeling Jada's terrified eyes burning into the side of my face. I did not look at her. I addressed the 5 commissioners directly. "Commissioners," I began, my voice steady and commanding, The defense claims Mrs. Washington was an innocent victim who did not understand the documents she was processing. However, the forensic audit of her brokerage's escrow accounts tells a completely different story. I opened my file and distributed copies of the banking traces to the board members. Over the course of 2 years, Jada Washington personally authorized 47 separate transfers from her client escrow overflow accounts to an offshore trust in Switzerland. I pointed to the highlighted lines on the paper. She did not just process the transactions. She actively commingled stolen corporate funds with legitimate real estate deposits to wash the money. Furthermore, 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Washington illegally transferred the deeds of 3 investment properties and over $400,000 in liquid cash into a trust entirely controlled by her mother, committing blatant fraudulent conveyance to hide assets from federal investigators. Jada shot out of her chair, her voice cracking in desperation. "That is a lie. I was protecting my money from my husband. He is the one who took on the corporate debt." The chairman slammed his gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "Sit down, Mrs. Washington," he barked. I turned to look at Jada for the first time. "You cannot protect money that does not belong to you, Jada. And you certainly cannot use your official state notary seal to illegally transfer $1 million property to a limited liability company you co-own, which you did to my personal residence the day my husband died. You are not a victim. You are a highly organized financial criminal." The board did not even need to deliberate in private. The evidence was irrefutable, completely destroying any shred of credibility Jada had left. The chairman leaned forward, his expression filled with absolute disgust. "Jada Washington," the chairman announced, his voice booming through the microphone. "Your actions represent a catastrophic breach of professional ethics, fiduciary duty, and state law. Effective immediately, your real estate broker's license is permanently revoked in this state. You are forever barred from practicing real estate, and this board will be turning all evidence of your escrow fraud over to the federal prosecutor to assist in your impending criminal trial." Jada collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed hysterically. Her career, her entire identity, was wiped out in less than 15 minutes. I closed my file, stepped down from the witness stand, and walked out of the double doors into the quiet hallway. I expected to leave the building in peace, but as the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, I saw Derek leaning against the marble wall. He looked equally haggard, wearing the same wrinkled clothes he had worn to the precinct. A moment later, Jada stumbled out of the hearing room, weeping uncontrollably. She looked up and saw her husband. "Derek," she choked out, reaching her hands toward him for comfort. "They took my license. I lost everything." Derek did not step forward to embrace her. He did not offer a single word of sympathy. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick yellow envelope, and shoved it hard against Jada's chest. "I am not going to federal prison because of your escrow accounts." Derek sneered, backing away from her as if she were contagious. "Those are divorce papers. My lawyer says if I cut ties with you now and claim you acted alone, I might avoid the worst of the corporate lawsuits. Do not ever call me again." Jada stared down at the divorce papers in her shaking hands, completely abandoned by the man she had destroyed her life to protect. I smiled, walking past them both toward the exit. The dominoes were falling perfectly. Derek walked down the marble steps of the commission building with a newfound swagger. He genuinely believed that throwing his wife to the wolves had absolved him of the financial apocalypse. I watched him strut toward his mid-sized sedan, a spring returning to his step. He thought those divorce papers were a magical shield against the $2.5 million in federal restitution he had eagerly accepted in that cheap lawyer's office. He actually believed that by abandoning Jada, he could simply walk away and restart his life. But Derek was always incredibly short-sighted. He completely forgot who he was dealing with. Derek worked as a mid-level data analyst for a regional defense contractor. It was not a particularly glamorous position, but it paid a very comfortable salary. More importantly, the job required an active Department of Defense security clearance. Anyone who holds a federal security clearance knows that the government closely monitors your personal financial stability. Sudden, unmanageable debt is considered the absolute highest risk factor for bribery, blackmail, and corporate espionage. A financially compromised employee is a dangerous employee. As a forensic auditor, I happen to have a wide network of contacts within corporate compliance departments across the state. I did not need to break any rules or act maliciously. I simply made a formal, highly documented inquiry to his employer's Human Resources Division. I provided them with the public legal records of the insurance waiver Derek had proudly signed. I politely asked if their employee Derek Hayes had updated his mandatory security profile to reflect his recent legal assumption of a multi-million-dollar corporate liability tied to a federal embezzlement investigation. The corporate machine moved faster than I could have ever hoped. Just 3 days after he abandoned Jada outside the hearing room, Derek walked into his office building feeling invincible. He swiped his badge at the turnstile, expecting another easy day of browsing the internet at his desk. But his badge flashed red. The glass gates did not open. Instead, 2 armed facility security guards approached him and escorted him directly to the Human Resources Department. The compliance officer was sitting at a large conference table, flanked by a company attorney. They slid a printed copy of the insurance acceptance waiver and the corresponding federal debt obligation directly across the table. Derek panicked. He frantically tried to explain that it was all a massive misunderstanding. He blamed his dead brother. He blamed Jada's fake real estate accounts. He even brought up the divorce, claiming he was actively cutting ties with the criminals in his family. The compliance officer did not care about his family drama. Federal clearance guidelines are entirely black and white. Carrying $2.5 million in fraudulent debt meant his security clearance was instantly and permanently revoked. Without an active clearance, he was completely useless to the defense contractor. He was terminated on the exact spot. They did not even let him return to his cubicle to collect his personal items. He was escorted out of the building and left standing on the sidewalk with absolutely nothing. The aftermath was swift and brutal. His final paycheck and severance package were immediately garnished by the corporate lawyers he now owed. His bank accounts remained completely frozen. Patricia, entirely destitute and awaiting her own criminal trial, could not offer him a single dime to pay his rent. For the first time in his pampered golden child life, Derek had no safety net. He had no mother to bail him out of trouble. He had no wealthy wife to leech off of. He was entirely on his own, buried under a mountain of debt that would follow him for the rest of his life. A few weeks later, I was running errands across town. I decided to stop for a quick lunch at a heavily trafficked fast food burger chain. I pulled my luxury sedan into the drive-through lane, rolled down my window, and stared at the glowing digital menu board. The speaker crackled to life with a loud burst of static. "Welcome to Burger Haven. Would you like to try our new double bacon combo today?" a voice asked through the intercom. The voice was entirely devoid of life, flat and exhausted, but it was unmistakably familiar. I pulled my car forward slightly, peering through the glass of the drive-through window. Standing next to the deep fryer, wearing a grease-stained polyester uniform and a paper hat, was Derek. The former golden child was sweating over a vat of boiling oil, earning minimum wage to slowly chip away at a $2.5 million debt. I smiled, pressed the button on the intercom, and placed my order. While Derek was busy flipping burgers to pay off a fraction of his insurmountable debt, his mother was facing her own day of financial reckoning. Patricia had always believed that the rules did not apply to her. She thought she could outsmart the federal government the same way she had manipulated our family for years. Before her official criminal trial for money laundering could even begin, Patricia attempted a desperate last-ditch maneuver. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, hoping to legally erase the massive $2.5 million corporate debt she had eagerly signed up for in that cheap lawyer's office. I decided to take the entire morning off from my auditing firm to attend her hearing. The federal bankruptcy court was a cold, imposing building made of polished granite and dark wood. It was a place where financial dreams went to die, and I wanted a front row seat for Patricia's final curtain call. I walked into the courtroom and took a seat in the back row of the gallery. I wore a perfectly tailored designer suit, a subtle nod to the success and independence Patricia had spent years trying to tear down. Patricia sat at the petitioner's table looking like an absolute shell of the arrogant matriarch she once was. Her expensive silk blouses and designer coats had been seized during her foreclosure. Today she wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray dress that looked like it came from a discount rack. Her posture was completely slumped. Without the buffer of her stolen wealth or her golden child to protect her, she was just an exhausted, terrified woman facing the devastating consequences of her own greed. When the judge asked her to state her case, Patricia immediately burst into loud, theatrical tears. She gripped the edge of the wooden table and began her performance, hoping to manipulate the court with pity. "Your Honor, please." Patricia wept, her voice echoing in the large courtroom. "I have lost absolutely everything. My eldest son passed away. My youngest son is entirely broke and cannot support me. The bank foreclosed on my home and I am currently sleeping on a cot in a public shelter. I am an elderly widow, and the corporate lawyers are hounding me for millions of dollars that I do not have. I just want peace. I just want a clean slate so I can live out my final years with some shred of dignity. Please grant the discharge." The judge, an older woman with a stern face and zero tolerance for nonsense, did not look moved in the slightest. She adjusted her reading glasses and stared down at the massive stack of financial documents on her bench. These were the exact documents I had compiled during my forensic audit. Mrs. Hayes, the judge, began, her voice sharp and authoritative. The bankruptcy code was created to offer an honest but unfortunate debtor a fresh start. It is a safety net for people who fall on hard times due to medical emergencies or unforeseen economic hardship. However, there are very strict, non-negotiable exceptions to this rule. Patricia stopped crying and looked up, a look of pure panic flashing across her pale face. "What do you mean?" she stammered. "I have no money. You have to erase the debt." The judge picked up the signed life insurance waiver and held it in the air for the entire court to see. Section 523 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code clearly states that debts incurred through false pretenses, fraud, or willful and malicious injury to another entity cannot be discharged under Chapter 7. You did not incur this $2.5 million debt because of bad luck, Mrs. Hayes. You incurred it by actively participating in a fraudulent scheme to claim a corporate life insurance policy while simultaneously orchestrating an international money laundering operation. You stole from a corporation and then you lied on official documents to steal even more. Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "But I am destitute," she cried out desperately. "How am I supposed to pay back millions of dollars?" "That is not the concern of this court," the judge replied coldly. "You made a calculated decision to engage in high-level financial fraud. You will now face the lifelong consequences of that decision. Your petition for Chapter 7 bankruptcy is officially denied. The corporate restitution debt of $2.5 million will remain attached to your name until the day you die." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down onto the sounding block. The loud crack echoed through the silent courtroom with absolute finality. Patricia collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The illusion of her clean slate was completely shattered. She was permanently shackled to a mountain of debt, with a federal criminal trial still looming over her head. As the bailiff ordered the court to rise, Patricia slowly turned her head and looked back toward the gallery. Her tear-filled eyes locked directly onto mine. I did not break eye contact. I sat perfectly straight, in my sharp designer suit, crossed my legs, and gave her a slow, satisfied smile. She had tried to bury me with her lies, but she was the one who had ended up in the grave. While Patricia was weeping in front of a bankruptcy judge and Derek was sweating over a deep fryer, there was still one loose end left to tie up. Amber. The mistress had been completely silent since the day she showed up at Jada's driveway dragging her cheap plastic garbage bags. But you cannot simply walk away from a massive federal financial investigation when your name is listed as the sole beneficiary of an offshore account funded by stolen corporate money. The Internal Revenue Service and the state had completely frozen everything she touched. Desperate, entirely broke, and facing imminent homelessness, Amber decided to play her final card. She attempted to file for state welfare and emergency housing, claiming she was the destitute mother of a deceased corporate executive's child. She even had the audacity to file a formal child support claim against Thomas's remaining bankrupt estate. To process any claims against an estate in probate, especially one tangled in federal fraud, the state requires absolute irrefutable proof of lineage. A mandatory court-ordered paternity test was scheduled. As the legally recognized spouse and the reluctant administrator of Thomas's ruined estate, I was required to be present when the family court judge unsealed the medical records. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a sharp-tailored blazer. Amber sat across the aisle in the sterile courtroom holding her crying toddler. Despite her desperate financial situation, she still looked incredibly smug. She glared at me, her chin lifted in defiance. She genuinely believed that because the child was supposedly Thomas's blood, the court would somehow magically unlock a hidden trust fund for her, bypassing the corporate lawyers and the federal holds. She thought this piece of paper was her golden ticket to the luxury lifestyle she had been promised. The judge, a balding man with a tired expression, opened the sealed manila envelope. He adjusted his reading glasses and prepared to read the certified laboratory results out loud for the court reporter to log into the official public record. I watched Amber's face, waiting for that triumphant, arrogant smile she had worn at the funeral when Patricia paraded her in front of the congregation. Instead, the judge frowned deeply. He looked up from the paper, staring directly at Amber. The DNA analysis confirms that the probability of the deceased being the biological father is exactly 0%, the judge announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. The courtroom fell dead silent. Amber dropped her purse onto the floor. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking as pale as a ghost. The judge cleared his throat and continued reading the detailed report, noting that because Amber had previously filed for state assistance programs, the child's DNA was automatically run through the state registry. A secondary database match has identified the actual biological father, the judge stated flatly. The father is a 22-year-old male who is currently employed as the maintenance and pool attendant at the luxury downtown apartment building where you previously resided. I almost laughed out loud. The sheer, unadulterated irony of the situation was staggering. Thomas had risked absolutely everything. He had committed felony embezzlement. He had destroyed his promising corporate career. He had betrayed our marriage, alienated his friends, and lied to everyone he knew just to play house with a woman who was actively sleeping with the pool boy behind his back. He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars and triggered a federal investigation to fund a legacy that did not even belong to him. Amber had played my arrogant, foolish husband for an absolute mark. The judge immediately dismissed her financial claims against the estate with prejudice. He then informed Amber that because she had attempted to claim federal estate funds using fraudulent pretenses, he was forwarding the hearing transcript directly to the federal prosecutor. Amber was escorted out of the courthouse by the bailiffs, sobbing hysterically, completely broke and now facing her own set of criminal fraud charges. But the poetic justice of the situation was not truly complete until Patricia knew the truth. Patricia was currently sitting in a cold concrete holding cell at a federal detention facility, awaiting her criminal trial for money laundering and bank fraud. She had lost her massive suburban house. She had lost her freedom. She had lost her golden child Derek, who refused to answer her collect calls. But through all of that misery, I knew she still clung to one final pathetic delusion. She still believed that her bloodline was surviving through her precious golden grandson. She still believed that all the crimes she committed were somehow a noble sacrifice for the sake of the family legacy. I walked up to the court clerk's window and requested an official notarized copy of the DNA laboratory results. I paid the $10 processing fee in cash. I took the heavy piece of paper, folded it neatly into thirds, and placed it inside a standard white envelope. I wrote Patricia's federal inmate identification number on the front, attached a stamp, and dropped it into a blue postal mailbox outside the courthouse. I stood on the sidewalk, feeling the warm afternoon sun on my face. I could only imagine the look of absolute devastation that would cross Patricia's face when she opened that letter in her tiny cell. I wanted her to sit in the deafening, suffocating silence of a federal prison and realize that she had destroyed her entire life, her home, and her freedom, all to protect a grandchild who was not even hers. Several months had passed since the federal indictments came down and completely dismantled the Hayes family. I was sitting in my new expanded corner office overlooking the downtown skyline when a specific alert popped up on my computer screen. It was an automated notification from the county foreclosure registry. Patricia's sprawling six-bedroom colonial estate was officially up for public auction. This was the house where I had endured over a decade of psychological torture. It was the house where Patricia held her lavish Thanksgiving dinners, intentionally seating me at the far end of the table and loudly mocking my modest upbringing. It was the physical monument to her arrogance and her fake generational wealth. I picked up my phone, called my private wealth manager, and authorized the immediate drafting of a massive cashier's check. The foreclosure auction was held on a crisp Thursday morning directly on the county courthouse steps. It was a gathering of absolute sharks. Local real estate developers, house flippers, and wealthy investors stood around in expensive suits chatting casually about how cheaply they could acquire distressed luxury properties. I stood quietly near the back of the crowd wearing a sleek black trench coat and dark sunglasses. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a booming voice, read off the property details. He started the bidding at a ridiculously low reserve price, considering the house was located in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the entire state. Immediately, a tall, arrogant-looking developer in a gray suit raised his numbered paddle. He clearly wanted to buy the estate, tear the house down, and split the massive lot into two smaller, highly profitable properties. Another local investor countered his bid. The price crept up slowly, tens of thousands of dollars at a time. The developer in the gray suit smiled lazily, casually, raising his paddle every single time someone challenged him. He thought he had the absolute upper hand. He assumed he was the wealthiest person standing on those concrete steps. When the bidding reached $800,000, the other investors finally groaned and dropped out. The auctioneer raised his wooden gavel, preparing to close the sale. Going once, the auctioneer called out over the crowd. Going twice. I stepped forward from the shadows of the crowd. I pulled off my sunglasses and raised my hand high into the cool morning air. $1.2 million, I announced clearly. My voice echoed across the quiet courthouse square. The entire crowd turned to stare at me in absolute shock. The developer in the gray suit whipped his head around, his lazy smile instantly vanishing. $1.2 million was aggressively above the current market value for a distressed, foreclosed home in that neighborhood. It was not a real estate investment. It was a flex of pure, unadulterated financial dominance. The developer scoffed, glared at me with pure resentment, and aggressively shook his head at the auctioneer. He was completely priced out. Sold to the lady in the black coat for $1.2 million, the auctioneer shouted, bringing the heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, satisfying crack. I walked straight up to the clerk's folding table, pulled the certified cashier's check from my designer leather bag, and handed it over. I did not need a mortgage. I did not need a hard money loan from a bank. I used the money I had safely grown in my private trust, entirely untouched by Thomas's filthy corporate theft. Within 20 minutes, the title was officially transferred into my name. I was the sole legal owner of Patricia's beloved fortress. 3 weeks later, the legal paperwork cleared the county system. I drove my car to the familiar, affluent neighborhood and parked directly in front of the massive wrought iron gates. The house looked exactly as Patricia had left it when the federal agents dragged her away in handcuffs. The manicured lawn was slightly overgrown, but the grand brick facade and the towering white columns still projected that sickening aura of old money superiority. But I was not there to move in. I was not there to flip it for a profit or rent it out to another wealthy family. I stepped out of my car and walked up the long, sweeping driveway to meet the contractor I had hired the week before. Behind my car, a massive heavy-duty yellow bulldozer rumbled loudly, its heavy diesel engine shaking the pavement. The demolition crew chief, a burly man wearing a bright orange hard hat, walked up to me holding a metal clipboard. "We have the city demolition permits cleared and the municipal utilities safely disconnected," Mrs. Hayes, the foreman, said, handing me a pen. "We are ready whenever you give the word." I signed the final authorization paper and looked up at the grand bay windows of the formal living room. That was the exact room where Patricia had once told me I was nothing but a temporary mistake. I handed the clipboard back to the foreman. I took a step back, crossed my arms over my chest, and gave him a single firm nod. "Tear it down," I commanded. The foreman blew a sharp whistle and signaled his driver. The massive bulldozer lurched forward with a terrifying roar. Its heavy metal treads chewed up the pristine front lawn, completely destroying the landscaping, and drove straight through the towering brick walls of Patricia's precious living room. It took 2 full weeks for the demolition crew to completely clear the debris. The shattered bricks, the splintered oak floorboards, and the crushed crystal chandeliers were all loaded into heavy dump trucks and hauled away to a landfill exactly where they belonged. Once the wreckage was gone, the crew brought in fresh topsoil to level the ground. I stood right in the center of what used to be the grand foyer. There were no more towering white columns. There were no more expensive Persian rugs. There were no more echoes of Patricia's mocking laughter bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. There was just dirt grass seeds waiting for the spring rain and absolute unbroken silence. It was incredibly peaceful. For over a decade, that house had been a fortress of intimidation. It was an architectural weapon designed to make me feel small, inadequate, and utterly dependent on the grand illusion of the Hayes family wealth. Patricia had used those walls to trap me in a perpetual state of gratitude for a life I was actually paying for. Now it was literally nothing. I had reduced their entire twisted legacy to a vacant plot of earth. Standing there in the cool afternoon breeze, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. When Thomas died, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a person was losing their spouse. I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing my marriage was a financial mirage built by a coward, protected by a syndicate of narcissists, and funded by felony theft. But they made one fatal miscalculation from the very beginning. They mistook my silence for weakness. Because I did not throw temper tantrums like Jada or yell and slap people like Patricia or boast loudly like Derek, they assumed I was an easy target. They thought a grieving widow from a working-class background would just pack her bags and disappear into the night. But as a forensic auditor, I learned early on in my career that the loudest person in the room is almost always the one with the most to hide. You do not need to scream to win a war. You do not need to pull hair or throw vile insults in a hospital hallway. You just need to pay attention. You let arrogant people keep talking. You let them keep signing fraudulent documents. You let them keep making wild assumptions about their own superiority. You give them enough rope, and they will gladly tie the knot themselves. Patricia Derek. Jada and Amber all dug their own graves because they were entirely too blinded by greed to look at the ground they were standing on. My ledger was finally balanced. The massive corporate debt had swallowed Derek and Patricia whole. The federal prison system had claimed the rest of them. The offshore accounts were seized, the real estate licenses were revoked, and the fake inheritances were dissolved. The accounts were permanently closed. I did not ruin their lives. I simply handed them the receipts for the toxic lives they had actively chosen to live. The justice system did the rest. It was the cleanest, most precise audit of my entire professional career. I took a deep breath of the crisp air, letting the chill fill my lungs. I looked down at the dark soil beneath my expensive leather boots. I thought about the younger version of myself, the girl who grew up in a cramped apartment, drowning in student loans, desperately trying to earn a place at a table where she was never truly welcome. I wished I could go back in time and tell her that she never needed their approval. She only ever needed her own brilliant mind. I turned my back on the empty lot and walked slowly down the long driveway. Parked at the curb was my brand new sleek black sports sedan. It was bought and paid for in cash using money I had earned through my own relentless hard work and smart investments. I opened the heavy door and slid into the luxurious leather driver's seat. I pressed the ignition button and the engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying purr. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the affluent, toxic neighborhood behind me for the very last time. The road ahead was completely clear. I was heading downtown to a premium glass office building. Today was the grand opening of my very own private forensic accounting firm. I was no longer just a corporate employee crunching numbers in a cubicle. I was the founder, the chief executive, and the sole owner of my future. Before I sign off, have you ever walked away from a burning bridge and realized you were the one holding the match? I would love to hear your stories of claiming your own power in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the empty dirt lot disappear around the corner. No more fake smiles, no more toxic obligations, just a brilliant, unwritten future. They tried to bury me with their lies, not realizing I owned the dirt. Blood makes you relatives, but loyalty makes you family. And me. I am my own family now. The profound lesson embedded in Nora's journey is the formidable power of silent composure in the face of absolute betrayal. When confronted by the blinding greed and calculated cruelty of her toxic in-laws, Nora did not resort to screaming matches, emotional breakdowns, or desperate pleas for justice. Instead, she weaponized her intelligence, her financial independence, and her unwavering emotional control. Toxic individuals, especially those hiding behind the facade of family, often rely on explosive emotional reactions to manipulate, gaslight, and break their victims. They thrive on the chaos they create. By denying them that reaction, you completely strip away their perceived power. This story brilliantly illustrates that you do not need to fight every battle loudly to emerge victorious. Sometimes the most devastating counterattack is simply taking a step back, holding the facts, and allowing arrogant, entitled people to dig their own graves. Patricia, Derek, and Jada were so consumed by their greed and false sense of superiority that they blindly signed away their own freedom, walking straight into a catastrophic legal trap of their own making. Their ultimate downfall was not a result of Nora's malice, but the inevitable consequence of their own deceitful actions. Furthermore, Nora's absolute triumph underscores the critical importance of financial literacy and independence for women. Having her own career, her own securely protected assets, and a deep understanding of the law served as an impenetrable shield against a family that actively conspired to leave her destitute and homeless. Blood alone does not entitle anyone to your peace, your hard-earned assets, or your respect. True family is built exclusively on a foundation of mutual loyalty and trust. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your own peace, share your story of reclaiming your power in the comments below.